Hello and welcome guys to yet another 5-Minute Friday where I share my engineering experience with you. And in this video I'm going to share 8 tips on how to adapt to new projects. So these are the tips that have worked for me personally. So if you guys find any value by the end of this video or in the beginning of this video, make sure to like and share this video because that's going to mean a lot to me. So whether you're working for a company or you're trying to help a friend with a side project, these tips I think are going to help you with getting smoother and getting faster when it comes to new projects which you have no idea about. Alright, so before we begin jumping into these tips that I wanted to share with you, I want to say that I am part of a research team when it comes to my company, when it comes to the company that I work for. So basically we own a lot of services, a lot of microservices, and you could say we own a lot of projects. That's why sometimes it's a little bit tedious and complicated to adapt or to context switch between these projects, and it takes some time to understand what's happening and what's going on. So the tips I'm going to share with you guys may be a lot of obvious things, a lot of things that you already know, but these are the things that help me along the way, help me overcome the issues when it comes to owning a lot of projects and when it comes to context switching a lot or having to adapt to new projects or even understand what the hell is happening, what the hell is going on. So without too much talking guys, let's jump into these tips. So tip number 1, make sure to know the tools, the languages and the frameworks your project is all about, or at least make sure to do some research and experiment with the languages, the frameworks and the tools alone. Yeah guys, I agree with you, it's an obvious tip, but somebody had to say it. So make sure you know the tools before you actually jump into the project, because I've done that mistake. A lot of people do that because they don't have a lot of time to actually learn those tools, to experiment with those tools, and they just jump into the project, they start editing, they start writing code, and that leads to unmaintainable code, to bugs and all that stuff. So make sure to allocate a small amount of time to experiment with those tools, as I said, because that is a requirement when it comes to getting started with new projects, to adapting to new projects, if you will. Alright guys, tip number 2, read the project docs, architecture diagrams, REST API specification, in case that's a REST API, and all that stuff, because most projects do have those things. So make sure you actually open up that readme.md or whatever that project has and start reading the documentation of the project, because that's going to give you a big overview over the project. It's going to make sure you understand what exactly is happening, and it's going to make it easier for you when you write code, and it's going to make you feel more confident when you're part of that project. So yep, can't stress it enough, read the docs, the architecture diagrams and the REST API specification, in case that's a REST API. So that's tip number 2. Alright guys, tip number 3, make sure to ask the code owners about where is what and how exactly you should do things around, because they are the guys who own the project, they are the guys who know the most about the project. But as I was saying before, make sure to do a little bit of research on your own. Make sure to check out the documentation of the project, the specs, all when it comes to documentation about that project, because you're gonna make their job a lot easier, because they're gonna start explaining the needed things you have to know and not the things which are necessary and require things like documentation, like REST API specification and all that stuff. Now when it comes to adapting to a project, you're probably gonna be given a task or something to solve or something to do about that project. So when it comes to implementation and implementing things around in a new project, a project you have no idea about or you're new to, make sure to also ask for advice from the code owners, because they know how what would be the best solution or the best fit for a specific implementation. That's why before you start implementing something, you're gonna want to consult that implementation with the code owners, because that's gonna be wise of you, and it's gonna save you a lot of time along the way, because you didn't have a full image of what exactly is the project about and what would be the best implementation for that specific feature you're trying to implement. So that's why make sure to consult implementations with code owners, because that's gonna give you a lot of benefit. That's gonna help you along the way. It's gonna save you a lot of time, and it's gonna make everyone happy. Alright guys, tip number 4, make sure to check out the unit and integration tests inside the project, because that's gonna help you understand the internals of the project and also how the project works as a whole. And also make sure to add unit tests after you finish your implementation, because it's not gonna break the code when you try to implement something new along the project. So that's why if you don't have any integration or unit tests, make sure to add those as soon as you get your hands on that. Make sure to add a to-do or something like that to actually have tests inside the project and slowly cover the project with unit and integration tests, because that is highly important. That's like the most important thing. That's the health of the project, if you will. If you don't have tests inside the project, you could say that the health of that project is debatable, you know? Today it may be good, tomorrow when somebody else implements something new, it may be a nightmare for the entire team. So that's why make sure to have those tests in place. All right, guys, tip number 5, another obvious one. Try to locate the section or the area of the code which you will likely have to work with. Try to narrow down the scope of that project, because the entire project may be like a big thing, especially if that project is a big project. It's gonna be impossible for you to understand it as a whole right away, because it's a big project. And trust me, there are lots of big projects out there, lots of legacy projects which are monoliths. So don't worry too much about it. Don't worry about the project as a whole, because you're not a machine to remember all that and to understand everything right away. Try to focus on a specific thing. Try to narrow down the scope of the project. That's gonna help you a lot. It's gonna help you get more comfortable about the project over time. So don't worry about it and don't stress it too much. All right, guys, tip number 6, make sure to add the changes which you're supposed to add, and make sure to implement or add the feature which you're supposed to add into that project. So here's how I do it, especially when I'm working on a new project, a project which I have no idea about and I'm trying to adapt. So basically I add in the change, I implement the feature which is required. Then I try to fix the tests which are failing, because when you add a specific change to a specific piece of code and that project is very well covered with tests, chances are the tests are going to fail us. So the second thing after you add the change or you implement the feature is to do a couple of refactoring or to adjust a couple of things. Now, don't try to make too big of refactoring, because that's going to be out of the scope of your ticket or out of the scope of your task. And that's also not a good thing when it comes to doing that. And I talked about that in my code reviews tips. And if you don't know about my code reviews tips video, make sure to check it out right here. So that's tip number 6. Make sure to add in the feature, fix the test, and make sure to make it beautiful. Make sure to make the code beautiful. Tip number 7, make sure to add unit and integration tests. And I cannot stress it enough. This is the health of your project. So make sure to add integration and unit tests right away after you implemented a specific feature, after you made sure your code works. So basically, by covering your project with integration tests and unit tests, you make sure to provide your project with health. So basically your project is going to be a lot healthier, safer to deploy, safer to change in the future, and safer to maintain over time. That's why, cannot stress it enough, make sure to cover your project with unit and integration tests. That is highly important, and that's the most important thing right after you wrote that implementation. All right, guys, so last tip, tip number 8, make sure to have a look in your project, have a look at your implementation or your piece of code which you have touched, and make sure to leave some to-dos if you have some ideas of improvements. They might be related to the scope of your task or to the scope of the entire project. Make sure to leave to-dos. So basically to-dos are like reminders for future. So as soon as you created that to-do, make sure to create a ticket in your task manager, something like Jira or something like that. I'm sure everyone's familiar with Jira, but anyways, if you use another task manager, make sure to create a task over there and make sure to link that task in the to-do, so that that to-do doesn't get lost, doesn't just get forgotten about, because there are projects which have lots of to-dos and nobody even cares to fix them, because there's no reference to a ticket and nobody cares about it, because everybody's busy, everybody doesn't have time for that. So that's why make sure to link the to-do to a specific ticket in your task manager. That's gonna help you a lot over time. It's gonna make sure those to-dos don't get forgotten about and people actually implement those improvements over time. All right, guys, so that is pretty much it on this video, and that's pretty much it on my 8 tips when it comes to adapting to new projects, when it comes to owning and making sure you're comfortable writing code when it comes to new projects, and context switching between projects and all that stuff. So make sure to leave a good legacy, a good footprint inside the project, and that's gonna make sure you actually get comfortable with that project, and it's gonna be easier when you're gonna context switch between projects, because you're gonna find a piece of code which is pleasant to look at, which is maintainable, which was tested, which has some to-dos for some improvements, and that's just gonna mean you left a good legacy, you left a good footprint. So hopefully this video was helpful for some of you. So if you guys can relate and if you found any value out of this video, again, make sure to like and share this video, because that's gonna mean a lot to me. So that's pretty much it on this 5-Minute Friday, guys, which is never a 5-Minute Friday, but stay tuned and I'll see you in the next video. Peace!